Today, we're gonna make carnitas. This is Mexican pulled pork and is one of the best things that you will ever eat. This recipe, I know, is not exactly the same as the authentic stuff in terms of its ingredients, but the taste is out of this world. So good, and I guarantee you, you're not gonna regret making it. Let's get started. Alright, so to make carnitas, the first and foremost thing you're going to need is pork. Now, I pretty much would say do not use any cut other than the pork shoulder / Boston butt. The reason for that is it has the right amount of fat content to get that perfectly tender, crispy meat when you fry it up, and even when you prepare it beforehand, it's just much better. So don't use pork loin, don't use any of the white pork meats, regardless of how tempting it may be for the sake of fat and calorie content, because it's just not going to taste the same. Definitely only use pork shoulder / Boston butt. This one is almost 8 pounds, but you can use any size that you have available. I'll also note that this is a bone-in, but you can use boneless if you have that available. At the time, the only thing I could find was the bone-in. Now, for the rub that you're going to be putting on it, you're going to need some salt and pepper, first of all. After that, for the main rub, you'll be doing a mixture of ground cumin, oregano. You can use Mexican oregano if you have it available. I'm completely out at the moment, so I'm just using regular. Works just fine either way. And then you're going to also mix avocado oil. So basically you're mixing the oil, the cumin, and the oregano together in order to get that proper rub that you need. And then on top of it, I should note, this can be done in a crock pot. This can also be done in an Instant Pot. I'm going to be doing it in an Instant Pot. You could also even do it in a pressure cooker. The main thing is that you want to do, at least personally, I think the best way to do it is in a pressure cooker, which in this case, Instant Pot is the way to go. But to put on top of the roast after you put all the rub on there, you're going to need a yellow onion. Doesn't have to be a yellow. You could use red, you could use white, whatever you have available. Doesn't really matter, but I would recommend having a large one. It's just going to be a rough chop that you're going to put on top of there. Then you're also going to put some garlic cloves. I just grabbed a handful because I like mine extra garlicky. And realistically, with as much meat as we're going to get out of this, it's going to be spreading all throughout. And then you're also going to do some jalapenos. You can do pickled or fresh. The pickled ones give more flavor. The fresh ones give more spice. You're not going to worry about trying to remove the seeds, so it's just a matter of personal preference on that matter. And the last thing, this is going to be probably the part that seems a little more, a little further from authentic, and that is putting some orange juice in there. You're going to be doing roughly about 2 cups for every 4 pounds of meat. Like I said, it's one of those things that it sounds odd, perhaps, but it actually makes a big difference in how it tastes, and it really helps with the caramelization when it comes to crisping up the meat after the fact. So we've got all of our ingredients. We're going to go ahead and get started with putting together the rub for the meat. Okay, we have rinsed and dried off our pork shoulder, and the first thing we're going to add is some salt. Now you're going to do roughly 1 tablespoon of salt for every 4 pounds of pork. Really, most of the time I just kind of fake it, but in this case I'm just going to go ahead and measure it out. And basically what I suggest doing is just do that on each side, do the same amount on each side. So black pepper, you're going to do about 1 teaspoon for every 4 pounds. So I'm doing 1 teaspoon on one side, and then I'll do the same on the other side. So to repeat all of that, just to make it a little clearer before I start rubbing the salt and pepper onto the pork, is that you want to have 1 tablespoon of salt for every 4 pounds of meat, 1 teaspoon of black pepper for every 4 pounds of meat. So altogether, we're going to be doing 2 tablespoons of salt and 2 teaspoons of black pepper. Now the goal here is just to get it covering the meat pretty decently, Realistically, you don't necessarily have to measure it out. You can just sprinkle the salt and pepper all over the meat until you have good coverage, and that will work just fine. In this case, I decided to do it the other way just because I wanted to make it a little clearer for the video. Put a little extra just to get some better coverage on top. Once the salt and pepper is reasonably well covering the meat, that's when we're going to go ahead and get together the rub. Okay, so for the rub, first of all, we're going to do the avocado oil. You can use olive oil, you can use any neutral oil at all. You're going to need about 1 tablespoon for every 4 pounds, so we'll be doing 2 tablespoons. Then we're going to need 1 tablespoon of oregano for every 4 pounds of meat. 2 of those. I'll just end up using this to stir it since it's already... I should have done that in reverse order, but you know, it is what it is. And then for the cumin, we'll be doing 2 teaspoons for every 4 pounds of meat. So we'll be doing a total of 4 teaspoons. It doesn't have to be super precise, just definitely recommend trying to get as close to that as you can, because cumin, as I've stated in previous recipes, can be a little overpowering if you put too much of it. Alright, and then we mix. So it's going to end up as like this nasty looking paste, but you're just going to go ahead and drizzle it a bit on top here. It's not going to look like much, but it'll spread pretty well. And if necessary, you can always make more of the rub, but in this case we're just doing exactly what we're calling for with this recipe. Try your best to get it in the crevices and stuff too, because that will just help with the flavor significantly. Alright, our rub is all ready to go. Now we're going to go ahead and get this into our Instant Pot. Alright, so when it comes to doing this in the Instant Pot, there's a couple of important notes I want to bring up. First of all, you're just putting this thing directly in. You don't need to add a rack at the bottom or anything else unless you really want to. I have made this in an Instant Pot numerous times, and I've never ever used a rack, and I've never needed it. It's never started to burn on me, so as far as I'm concerned, you don't really need it. All right, and then at this point, we're going to go ahead and start getting everything else ready to go on top of it. So we're going to get our onion chopped. Let's place that directly on top of the pork. It doesn't have to be perfect. All this is going to get mixed together anyway. All right, then we'll do more of a rough chop with our garlic. It doesn't have to be perfectly put together. We just want it to be in smaller pieces. You can, of course, use a garlic press if you prefer that. Mine is dirty right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and chop up the garlic instead. Alright, and then we'll add our jalapenos, and really you can just kind of fake it on how much you want here. If you're doing fresh, you want to do probably around 2 of them, but because I'm doing pickled and they're not as spicy, I'm going to do more than that. The spice is going to get spread around to the point where it's not going to, you're not really going to taste it very much, particularly with the pickled jalapenos, but it does give a lot of flavor. And then finally, we're going to add our orange juice. We're doing about 2 cups for every 4 pounds of meat. So I'm going to be doing 4 cups. I know it's a lot, but with all of the flavors mixed together, it's just going to be glorious. One thing I do want to note on this whole thing is that you don't actually have to use fresh ingredients. When it comes to the onions, you can use dried onion. You can use garlic powder or pre-minced garlic, although it's just not going to give you quite, the pre-minced garlic is not going to give you as much flavor. But here we just want to pour the orange juice over gently so that it spreads around a bit, and then we'll do it more around the sides. This is going to help not only to keep this thing to help produce more flavor, but it also will keep it from sticking to the bottom of the pan, so you don't have to worry about it giving you the burn notice. Now that we have it all ready to go, we're going to go ahead and put the lid on our Instant Pot. Making sure it's set to the sealed mode. So the cook time is going to vary depending on the size of your roast. You want to plan on 1 hour of pressure cooking at high pressure for every 4 panels. Now, if it is bone in, add an extra half hour onto that because it's going to take at least that amount of time. Because mine is closer to 8 pounds, I'm going to be cooking it for 2.5 hours. 2 hours just because of the meat itself, but an additional half an hour because it's bone in. Now, if you decide to do this in a crock pot instead, which is completely doable, I've done it that way myself, it is going to take significantly longer. You can bet on it taking a minimum of 6 hours for this size of a roast. For a 4 pound, you probably could get by in 3 to 4 hours. Either way, you'll just want to check it. Last thing I want to point out with this is that if at the end of the cooking time, you find that the meat is not separating from the bone, then you should let it cook longer. You should put it back on high pressure, give it another half hour. That's just my recommendation from my experience. It makes it significantly easier when the meat just comes right off the bone, and then it just falls apart much more easily. So it's way better. It will give you much less of a headache. And if you are doing this in a crock pot, it'll be kind of a similar thing. It just takes a lot longer to cook. So high pressure, 2.5 hours for a bone-in 8-pound roast, 1.5 hours for a bone-in 4-pound roast, and then anywhere in between, you kind of just have to fake it. Either way, it's not going to hurt too much if you go a little bit over, more just if you go under. So we're going to go ahead and get that started, and we'll come back in about 2.5 hours. All right, the roast has had a chance to fully cook. The pressure released naturally, and now we're ready to open it up and take a look. And that is beautiful. Now, for the sake of not having to work in all this liquid, we're going to go ahead and move the Instant Pot over to the side here and then grab another bowl so that we can pull out our roast. And at this point, it should pretty much just be falling apart as you're picking it up, which tells you that it's definitely done. See already that it's coming apart really easily. We're just going to put it in here so it's easier to shred. And the way that you'll know for sure that it's done, apart from the fact that it's falling apart like this, is if the bone basically just separates itself without any effort whatsoever. See? Like that. That bone is nice and clean, completely free. So then we'll go ahead and pull out the rest of the roast. You'll occasionally get a large piece. That's easier to get out. But for the most part, it's pretty much just going to fall apart, especially as you start working on shredding it. And we'll just set this bone aside so it's not in the way. Now, you may be wondering what we're going to do with this liquid, because there is a lot of it, but we're actually going to still be using all of this liquid. So the idea here is that we will be shredding up all the meat, and then we will reintroduce it to the liquid. Then we'll let this cool down, because the way I always end up doing it is because I have so much of this available, I end up freezing the majority of it. I just put it in bags, 1 pound increments, and then it makes a really easy option for future meals. So we'll go ahead and get all of this shredded up with a couple of forks, and then after that we'll reintroduce it to the pot. now that everything is reincorporated into the liquid, if you are going to be having this for a meal coming up, then you can start frying it up in the next step. Otherwise, if you're making it for meals ahead, like I am, then what you can do is you can actually let this have a chance to cool for a while. And after it has had a chance to cool, whether you put it in the fridge overnight or otherwise, you can start splitting it up into 1 pound increments, or however you prefer to split it up. Regardless, this stuff is great for both a right now meal and for future freezer meals that you can just pull out and then cook it up. So when we come back, which will be actually tomorrow for Cinco de Mayo, we will go ahead and fry some of this up for the big day. All right, now that our carnitas is done with the slow cooking part, or rather the pressure cooking part, we have just over a pound here, and that's including the liquid. Remember, this is like a mixture of both the juices from the pork and also a little bit of avocado oil and the orange juice that we used for cooking. So we're gonna go ahead and just put all of that into the skillet on high heat. If you're doing a pound, you can get by using a 10-inch skillet pretty easily. I'm using a 12-inch skillet just because that way the liquid has a little more room to move around. It may look like it is a lot of liquid, and it is initially, but trust me, you want to have a lot of liquid because that's really going to reduce down. It's going to produce so much more flavor, and in the end, you're not going to have any liquid. It's all going to get absorbed. It's going to get cooked into the meat, and basically here, you're just going to be keeping an eye on it. You're going to be stirring it pretty frequently. You can leave it alone, sitting just on the high heat for a while as well. But as you let this sit, all that liquid is going to get absorbed into the meat, and it's going to help it become that crispy perfection that you would expect out of carnitas. So we're going to get that doing its thing for a while. All right, in my opinion, that is sufficiently crispy. I mean, just look at that. That's beautiful. We're going to turn off the heat. Obviously, if you want to do it longer, you can do it longer. If you want to do it shorter, you can do it shorter. The pork is going to be delicious no matter what you do. But I definitely recommend, regardless of anything else, that you cook it on the stovetop, get that liquid absorbed, and it'll make it so much better. But now, we're going to go ahead and make up some tacos and try this stuff out. And now the taste test. Put a little bit of habanero hot sauce. So hers has pickled red onions, sour cream, cilantro, and a little bit of lime juice. And then mine is the same except with regular yellow onions. So.
You have the lime juice on it already?
Yes, it already has the lime juice. I just didn't do the hot sauce since I wasn't sure about whether or not you would want that. Oh man, that looks beautiful.
That is so good. I love the carnitas. It's one of my favorite types of meat. Get that good crunch, but it's also like moist and succulent and a little sweet. pickled onion, the cilantro in there. So good.
All right. Now this is something I always look forward to. I went ahead and put a pretty generous amount of that habanero hot sauce on there, but oh man, I love doing tacos. Now I will say one thing. When it comes to this, always use corn tortillas if you're doing this kind of taco because it's so much better. You can do them street taco size and then you just do it, double them up, and you can't fit as much in there, but they're kind of like taco vitamins. You'll just have 1 or 12. But oh man. There's so much flavor in that Carnitas. I mean, I found this recipe something like 10 plus years ago, have adapted it to make it my own, and it's incredible. It's like you have the juiciness at the same time as you also have the outside crispiness of the pork, and a little bit of sweetness from the orange juice, and just like the right amount of cumin and oregano. It is a little better with Mexican oregano, but it's still really good even with regular. And then I love doing the yellow onions there, and the cilantro and that habanero hot sauce. I probably actually could have even put more of that, but it's just, man, this stuff is incredible. It's super easy to make. I mean, the amount, I only used roughly about a pound of what I made. I probably still have another 8-ish pounds because that amount that I used was including the liquid. So yeah, make sure that you bag this stuff up, stick it in the freezer in 1 pound increments. Make sure you have plenty of the juice in each bag, and that way it just really helps with the flavor and getting it crispy and everything else. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like if you liked this video, subscribe to the channel, and share with your friends, and stay tuned for more recipes that, while not necessarily authentic, are always delicious. So definitely always only use pork butt, or I'm sorry, and then after that you'll be doing a separate rub. We're gonna go ahead and get started with rubbing on the meat. About 1 tablespoon for every 4 pounds of salt. I'm sorry. So one tablespoon for each 4 pounds. Okay, let me say that again. All right. So then 1 tablespoon for every 4 pounds of oregano. I'm sorry. 1 teaspoon of oregano. And then if you are cooking on high pressure, if you're doing the pressure cook, you're going to be cooking it for 2 hours for an 8-pound roast. So basically you figure that, let me back up. All right.